Hey guys, Putzman 945 here. Welcome back to another video. In today's video, I am gonna be talking all about metaphor here. Um, Metaphor Refantazio to be uh more direct, I guess, because not everyone would know what I mean when I say metaphor. Um, Metaphor Refantazio. I just finished it last night, and um, like the situation with Rebirth, it is one of the best games I've ever played. Um, and yeah, that's not the end of the video. That's just like the starting statement is. It is landed at number 6 in my personal top 10. Um, and this is gonna be more than my normal videos, a lot of incoherent rambling because I don't really have my thoughts fully put together on this game. I just have a ton of very scattered ideas, so please just keep that in mind and bear with me here. But um I don't even know where to start. Music was fucking incredible. Of course, it's the same composer who did the next. What his name is? I know I've heard it before, but uh, Shoji Meguro. That's it. That's it. Yeah. Okay. Hmm. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't even know that. Huh. Esperanto. What is that? What is this language? Hold on. Okay, sorry, returning to reality now. I just spent like the last 5 to 10 minutes on a total Wikipedia rabbit hole of a language I never heard of called Esperanto. Super interesting, by the way, recommend the read, but apparently it's what the lyrics of the game were composed in. I didn't know that. But none of that is relevant at all because the name of the composer I was trying to think of is Megumi, Shoji, who also did the Persona series, and he is a fantastic composer, and the music is really, really fucking good in this game. Probably in my top 10 video game soundtracks. Um, the graphics were incredible. The art style was so unique. I loved how it seemed like similar to their previous games. And yet it was something new. That's kind of an overarching theme with this video is in terms of like a lot of the things that they do here are similar to Persona, but new in their own way, and I think it's really cool. And I think that the first thing I'll mention of that is the art style because it somehow feels like a combination between Persona 5 Royal and Persona 3 Reload, and yet it also has its own like unique hint to it, which I think is really cool. Um, As always, it is an Atlas game, which means the turn-based combat will be absolutely top tier, and it certainly did not disappoint. Now this is definitely where I need to talk about one of the absolute biggest points of this game, which is the archetype system. Um, I think the archetype system is such a fucking cool idea. And a theme of this video that you are going to see is things that I think are done well in this game. I'm going to mention this a lot. These are things I want carried over to future Atlas games. Um, and the first thing of when I say that, maybe you can't exactly copy this exact archetype system to anything other than a metaphor sequel. But like, we all know Persona 6 is going to happen at some point. So what I want from this game is like the 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 the, the fantastic thing about this archetype system that makes it just so freaking cool is this idea that any party member can mix and match different classes and as a result can have completely different play styles. Um and the only difference maker is whether you like level them up enough, and if you kind of eventually like mix and match certain, like you level up certain of the low archetypes, you can get a better higher level archetype that is like a fusion of those two together. And I think the way that it's implemented is honestly genius. Um, because I think it makes for such an engaging like system, because it means that there is so much variety to how you can do combat and how you can approach boss fights and strategy of combat. It adds this whole new like like this whole new like dimension of depth in terms of the strategy that you can do. It's really cool. Um, um, and in terms of like something that I want from like a Persona 6 is that like I obviously was saying, you can't really copy this exact idea. But like what I would love to see in a next Persona game as like an evolution on Persona that takes ideas from this game, because it's very clear to me that a lot of things that they did in this game were them experimenting with a lot of new ideas. And I love that, and I think a lot of those ideas worked out extremely well. And therefore, I want these ideas to be like carried over into a future game. Um, so for a potential Persona 6, something that I would love to see is maybe party members beyond the main character have not like in the way that it has been where like the protagonist was the one that could cycle through every persona, but like what I think could be a really interesting idea maybe is like say, a party member has like multiple personas, as part of a very conflicted personality, and they have multiple aspects to them, like multiple layers. I think that could make for really interesting characters, and I think similar to the archetype system, then that could be used in a really cool way. This is also partly just me brainstorming ideas, I guess, for Persona 6. that might be essentially what this video is boiled down to. But um, my point is, I love the archetype system. I think it is such a cool idea, and I really, really want Atlas to do something to like take some evolution of the persona system based on the archetype system. Because I think it is such a cool system. It adds such another so many like more layers of depth to the strategy to the combat, and I think it's just fantastic. And there are a ton of just like little improvements to the gameplay mechanics to this game compared to previous Persona games, which like, and I'm going to preface this by saying these improvements that I mention are not like inherently direct negatives that I have with Persona games. Just they are like innovations that I suddenly find myself wanting to never go without. Because um and like I think like my two main examples of this are the fact that unlike Persona, in order to increase a they're called followers in this game, but I'm just going to use a general term, social link. If you want to increase the social link rank, then you don't need to have like an empty placeholder hangout that doesn't contribute to the main rank. And if you don't quite know what I'm talking about, then I'm referring to the thing where it says like, my bond with so and so character will not increase right now, but it might later type thing. That's what I'm referring to. There is none of that in this game. It's like when a rank up becomes available is just that. And not only that, but it's also eight of them and not just 10. So in that, now granted, Metaphor is a shorter game than, uh, let me more specific. It's shorter in the sense of the calendar months. Like it's only a 5 month long game, which is crazy to say out loud because I put like 50 hours into it. Um, but it is a shorter game calendar month wise, so therefore it has a shorter max social link rank. But like that idea of like, just being able to rank up and then not have like that empty placeholder, it felt like it saved a lot of time. And that is very much something that I want to see implemented in the future because I think it was such a nice little detail that I didn't really appreciate until I played this game. Again, not because it's like necessarily that egregious of an issue I have with Persona games, but it's just a really nice quality of life thing that I would love to be brought over in more Atlas games. And another one of those is the fact that when you're traveling on the Gauntlet Runner to places, essentially like before doing the dungeon or whatever, you have this time slot on the Gauntlet Runner to like, improve stats, do whatever on the runner, hang out with followers, that kind of thing. Which is new because like in Persona 5, for example, um, if you are gonna say like do a palace, for example, then um that is like the entire thing that you do. And in that sense it is kind of the same because like if you do a dungeon in a day, then that nighttime slot is still occupied. Because you end up being tired. Just basically like the entire day, kind of like Persona 5. But the difference is, like in Persona 5, we say you're gonna tackle a palace one afternoon, like do the infiltration and whatnot, then then that's it. You don't have any time for hanging out like with increasing like social links that day. But in Metaphor, you do because you do get that time on the Gauntlet Runner to do that. And that is such an amazing detail. And I don't know how that would be implemented in a Persona setting necessarily, but like I want like both of those features to be carried over into future Atlas games because they were such amazing, like nice quality of life ideas. And I loved them. And I'm sure there are more like specific examples that I'm not thinking of, but like there were so many little things in this game that I felt like here's another one actually. Um I didn't feel like any okay. The the portion of complete bullshit in the major dungeons I felt like was drastically reduced compared to Persona 5, for example. Not really Persona 3, just because that isn't really the way that Tartarus functioned necessarily. It wasn't really like that kind of format. Um, but sorry, I was mentioning on that for a second. Shit, I forgot what I was talking about. Um, dungeons, right? Um, there was like bullshit in the dungeons. And what I mean by that is like um just like comparatively the amount of like things that feel like they're just completely unnecessary mechanics. Now, there definitely is some of that, and as a result, I think that like the Dragon Temple is probably the worst dungeon in the game, but it's like not by that much of a margin comparatively to other to Persona 5 because because of the fact that there is just less bullshit in it even if there is some bullshit in it. Um and yeah, I really I really appreciated that. Um Now, as I said, the Dragon Temple is probably the worst dungeon in the game because it has that horrible, like, human mechanic, and then there was the whole, like, lever flipping puzzle and the stupid thing with the staircases, but, like, that's kind of it, and it's beside the Sky Palace, which essentially just copies all of the same puzzles, it, um, that's kind of like all the bullshit puzzles in any of the dungeons across the game, which I really appreciate because a lot of that bullshit is never very fun. And so, that's another one of those little things that I think is just very much improved from previous Atlas games that I want to see carried over. Um, and yeah, the main overarching point I have is, there are so many just absolutely fantastic little details and features and like quality of life improvements, which just make this game so much more fun to play that I want to see carried over and continued into every other Atlas game that I play from now on after this game. Um, Now, getting to Canyon, this is kind of related to the last point, but not completely. But um, honestly, there's a reason why I'm not gonna like make a tier list of the followers in this game. Because honestly, it would be a very boring tier list because every one of them would be in like B tier at the lowest, and most of them would probably be in A or S tier. If that tells you anything about the quality of the followers in this game. Because as fucking incredible as the peak ones are in Persona 5 and Persona 3, there are absolutely stinkers in both of those games. And yet, in this game, I felt like there was not a single follower relationship that was bad or even mid, to be honest. Um, like every single one was extremely enjoyable, and there were several times where I had quite a difficult time picking which of the followers I wanted to hang out with. Um, so in that respect, um, yeah, I think it was fantastically well done. Oh boy, I'm tired. Ugh. Um, I'm not going to talk about every one here, even though I definitely could. I'm way too tired for that, and that would make this video way too long. Um, I think my absolute favorite in the entire game was Alonzo. And this is one that I feel like you could just miss by complete fucking accident if you like don't know what to do properly and whatnot. Because you have to like find something for him or help him in a con, if I remember correctly, and then he gives you back something that was stolen from you. Uh, which might have been the book, but I don't remember. It could have been something else as well. Um, so if you never end up obliging his request, then you never unlock that as a thing, which I think is just amazing. That idea of like just like choice and whatnot. And a little bit of a side tangent, but just quickly. But I do really like the way the quest system works. The quest system works in this game. I think it's very compact and easy, and especially with like getting bounties and such, and like finding out where everything is. I think it's much better done than the whole Mementos request idea in Persona 5. So, with little improvements like that, I was just talking about. But anyway, Alonzo's is fantastic because there are so many plot twists just in that one alone, and it is so captivating, and it's just so interesting to me. Um, but then like, um, and then just the conclusion with like him having them thought dead and whatnot, it was fantastic. But then there was the whole thing of like, he was presumed dead and such, and and I think I mixed up my thoughts there. Um, what I was meant to be talking about was uh, I think the whole thing of like the followers are all fantastic. I really like all of them. Um, especially Basilio, I think is really good, not just in the follower, but as a character overall. Um, but this game also does such a fantastic job with the characters overall. Um, really, okay, that's gonna break my chair. Um, like Fidelio and Basilio are like my favorite duo in the game because I think that their development is just really interesting as this way turning against Luis, and I think the decision to have them accompany your character on the Gauntlet Runner is one of the best decisions they made for the whole game because I think the way that that contributes to their characters is utterly fantastic. I will talk about Luis as a villain though in a second. I do have a lot to say about that. Also, Catelyn as a Batlin. I'm already I think it was Batlin as a character was also just fantastic, especially by like late game. His motivations were just really interesting, and even though Luis is the main antagonist, there are several examples in this game where um the game takes incredibly multi-layered characters and makes them very interesting antagonists, or makes being an antagonist one part of their very multi-layered character. And I think the best example of this, no doubt, is Fortin, because he is more subtly a villain, but he's still a very evil dude. And even though he's not even close to his grand main villain as Luis is for the entire game, he's also hardly a twist villain. And I think that that like nuance just makes his character fantastic, and he's not the only one throughout the game that is like that. Now speaking of villains, Luis was a fantastic villain throughout this entire game. Um, I thought that his I thought he was incredibly consistent the entire time, and I really liked that a lot because Persona 5, the villains had, and Persona 3 as well to an extent. I felt like the reason why they were so captivating is because they had very complicated motivations, and that as a result made them become because they were very complicated villains. Luis does something special and it feels kind of refreshing in that way. Not that I was like getting tired of those more complex villains, but in a way, I'm not saying Luis isn't like complex and whatnot, but in a way, compared to the villains of Persona 3 and 5, he is much simpler. He is much more direct and much more directly evil. Um, and the way that he kind of goes on about his ideals is just really interesting to me. Um, and it's just a very like refreshing take on villainy, I guess, in Atlas games after, 3 and 5 have very complicated, in-depth villains. Luis is a lot more straight to the point and direct, and I think it's a really interesting change. And I think everything about him as a villain worked fantastically, including the plot twist around his death. That was just absolute peak cinema right there. Um, Now, speaking on the story, I think that this far and away has the best story of any Atlas game I've ever played. The themes that they explore about like the differences between fantasy and reality and how one person's reality can be a different person's fantasy, how fantasy can be this driving force for reality and everything like that is just it's such a unique theming that they decide to go with, and it fits the high fantasy world and setting exquisitely well. um I'm just a big, and the entire story is just fucking massively told. I'm really trying not to spoil anything, but there were so many insane plot twists, um, that just had me like put my Steam Deck down and just kind of walk around in utter disbelief for about 10 minutes. I think for the amount of plot twists in the game, I probably did that kind of action at least like 3 to 5 times throughout the entire game. It's crazy. But the story was just massively told, but I'm not spoiling anything because I think it's best to be experienced yourself if you want to. Um, and there was one thing I wanted to bring up, but I don't remember what. Oh, speaking of like those little changes that are made to this game, I think my absolute favorite one is the decision to give the protagonist voice acting. I cannot explain how much this um increases the immersion because it feels like the character that you play is an actual character who has real relationships with these followers and actually exists in this world. And I think that that decision was absolutely fantastic, and that for me, whenever there's a Persona 6, that is an absolute fucking must. There's got to be a main protagonist with voice acting because it was just amazing. And in fact, this is probably my biggest complaint about the game, oddly enough. And this is like not enough voice acting. And what I mean by that is like, um, and this is a trend set in Persona games too. It's not like Metaphor is only guilty of this, but like I think in Metaphor it kind of reaches its peak of being not very enjoyable because of the fact that it is very famous. But what train of thought again? Oh, oh boy, I kind of forgot where I was going with that. Um, probably the last thing I'm going to touch on in this video is just I think the way that they did this idea of the high fantasy world is so unique because they included a lot of elements that kind of befit a more standard like um uh, yeah, the high fantasy world is just very, very cool. It has amazing design. I think the fact that all the races are unique to this game and not just like, elf, dwarf, human, like the generic options like that. Um, I think that like having all of those in one basket, which is um I don't know what I was thinking. Anyway, I'm gonna end it here because fuck, I'm tired. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you later. Play Metaphor is peak. Bye bye.